Hello! Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this fantastic 1/12 scale garden shed. I'm just going to turn it around so you can see it from all angles. Got a window on this side. And then here we have a removable roof panel and also a removable side panel. Slides out like that. And you can also use a piece of clear acetate for this side panel, and I'll talk about that as we go along. And that just means then that people can just see inside without you having to remove it. But I actually like people to sort of peer in through the door first and then to sort of reveal the inside, but it's entirely up to you. And then we've got this concrete floor in here, a little window ledge, and as well as this I'm going to be showing you how to make lots of things to go inside. I'll do them all as separate projects so you can pick and choose. And we'll have some shelving in there and a workbench. And then on the outside I've just put a sort of handle on the door, but I'll do a separate tutorial for some hinges and maybe a lock as well, so you can decide which to have, and we'll do some finishes on it as well. But today I'm just going to show you how to do the shed, and I'm just going to pop this one to one side and show you the other one that I've made. And this one I'm calling my write-in shed, and it's really something I'd love in real life, just a little retreat to lock myself into and just write. And it's made in the same way, but inside I've left it as natural wood, and I've fitted wooden flooring and a skirting board in there, so it's a lot posher than the garden shed. And once again I'll be doing tutorials for a writing desk, bookshelves, and lots of little bits and pieces to go in there, so you can pick and choose from those which ones you want for your own project, or you might want to do something completely different with it. Whatever you decide to do with yours, I'd love to see photographs. You could email me or contact me through Facebook, and I'll put the links for those below. Okay, so for the shed I've used again Obeche wood, and that's spelled O-B-E-C-H-E, and there's several thicknesses of sheet and strip wood that you're going to need, and that's all coming up in the cutting lists which are coming up next. And I've done it all separately because there's again quite a lot of parts, so I've done each of them on a separate cutting list just to make it easier for you. Okay, so there's quite a lot you're going to need as well, so I'll get through this quite quickly. And we'll start off with our Swan Morton craft knife, which takes a size 10A blade. Always put a new blade in at the start of a project, and when it begins to catch or drag along the wood, and for this project you'll probably need a few blades. Gorilla Wood glue, or any sort of PVA, nice strong glue that bonds quickly. Masking tape to hold pieces together, and also clamps. That's to hold things together while the glue is drying. Steel rule, obviously for measuring and for cutting your wood, along with your craft knife. And you can find tips for cutting wood in my other video, Working with Wood. Do have a look at my list of videos for that. Screwdriver for scoring grooves into the door. A nice sharp pencil, make accurate marking. You're going to need a mini drill with a small drill bit. That's a 0.75mm drill bit in there, so that's less than a millimetre. So just the smallest bit you've got. And some dressmaking pins for hinging the door. A mitre block and saw for cutting the strip wood. And I've also got one of these handheld mitre cutters, which is really handy, especially when we're doing the sort of mitred strip wood inside the shed. pair of pliers for cutting your dressmaking pins, and cocktail sticks, which I've just knocked over, which I use for applying glue. I just put a bit of glue onto a piece of card and I apply it with a cocktail stick, and I also use these for removing excess glue from along joins. I've used a walnut varnish, and that's just a normal household interior satin varnish for the shed, and emulsion paint for the writing shed. And then for the roof, to create this textured effect, I've used emulsion paint mixed with fine grain sand. A couple of grades of sandpaper, something like a 120 or a 180, and then a 500 for sort of finer sanding. You'll need them in larger sheets as well. I just cut them down like this to make them more easy to handle. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we need. There probably will be as we go along, but that's all I can think of for now. So like I say, the cutting lists are coming up next, and then we'll get started. We're going to begin by gluing together our front panels and our back panels to give us that wider piece. So I've dispensed some glue here onto a piece of cereal packet card, and I'm using a cocktail stick to apply it. So just begin by applying it down that edge. And then with the pieces flat on your worktop, press them together so that you've got a flush edge along the top and bottom. You just use a spare cocktail stick to remove that glue that's coming out, but you don't have to be precise here. It's quite liberating, this project, so you can be quite messy with it. All this is going to be covered with shiplap. Press that together, and then we're going to use masking tape to hold it together while the glue's drying, if I can find the end. So cut some strips, and we're going to place them across that join. And the reason we're doing that rather than just going down the middle is because this is pulling the two pieces together. So put 3 or 4 pieces on each side. Pulling the two pieces together as you go, and they will lift up, but that's okay because we'll turn it over and do the other side as well, and that will flatten it out. That's there. One more piece, and then carefully turn it over and do the same on the other side, and then just slide that to one side to dry. Do the same thing with your back panels, and slide that piece to one side to dry as well, and then we're going to do the same thing again with the 2 side panels. Final piece there, and again that piece can be left to dry, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So once you've allowed enough time for the glue to dry, and I left these drying overnight, we're going to cut the apex for the roof. So turn the piece onto its side and make a pencil mark 140mm from what will become the bottom edge. So that's 140mm or 5.5 inches. Join that line up, and then we know where the centre is because that's where our 2 panels join. So we're going to cut from this line here up to the centre there. So place your ruler just below where the cut should be, and that will just allow for the thickness of the craft knife blade. and just begin by doing a light score. I do that because it's always quite difficult when you're cutting against the grain of wood, and especially so when you're cutting at an angle across it. And then you can go in a little bit deeper. Make sure you've got a new blade in your knife, makes the job a lot easier. Always beware where your fingers are. And I'm holding on to the steel rule quite tightly so that it doesn't slip. Piece, and then do the same thing at the other side. Okay, so do that with both pieces. Okay, so we're now going to do the cutout for the door. So this will be made in just one of the panels. And we'll begin by making the width measurement. So we know where the centre is because that's where the panels join, and the door is 70 millimeters or 2 3/4 inches across. So place the ruler so the centre of that measurement is in line with the central panel, and then do the line, make a pencil line to either side. So that's the 70 millimeters or 2 3/4 inches with the centre of that measurement along the join line there. And then move the ruler up just to this line that we made earlier and make the same measurement, like that. And then turn the piece to do the height measurement, and the height is 156 millimeters, and that's 6 inches and 3/16. So 6 3/16 of an inch, or 156 millimeters. Place the ruler just below those pencil marks you've just made, just to allow for the thickness of your pencil, and join that up. I'm going to put a line across there like that, so where my top bit is, and this side as well. 156 millimeters, or 6 3/16 of an inch, like that, and then join the lines up across the top there. So that will be the door cut out. And then when you're cutting a section from wood, begin just by making a little nick in the corner. So go through with the blade like that, just the tip of the blade, down the line like that. Don't have to go all the way through the wood, but just make a little score, and then that way as well. And this will just help keep the knife within the line when we make the cut. Okay, and always cut against the grain first whenever you're cutting a section from wood, and that will help to prevent the wood from splitting. So line the rule up across that top line, and in line with those little scores you've just made, then just begin with a lighter cut. You can go in a little bit deeper. And that, by making that little nick at the end there, it stops the knife from sort of going all the way along. It's just a good little tip there when you're cutting sections out. And just keep going. It is, like I say, difficult to cut against the grain. I'm using a lot of pressure here. And I think there's a bit of a knot in the wood there. I find like the blade is sort of getting stuck somewhere. It's probably because there's a knot in the wood, and that's a natural, it's a natural substance, so that will happen. There. Again, be really careful of your fingers. And I'm only saying that from personal experience. I've got the scars to prove it. Okay, and then we can turn and cut in the other direction. So lighter line first, lighter cut rather, and then go through a little bit deeper. Like that. And this bit up here at the moment is quite narrow, so quite fragile, but we will be putting the shiplap across, so all of this piece will be strengthened. And make sure the piece is free before you try to pull it away. So if you can feel it sticking anywhere, which I can in that corner, snip through it rather than pull it away, otherwise you will split the wood. And just turn that over and see what's happening back there. I guess I haven't gone all the way across at the top there. And then you can save that piece of wood for another project. You can just snip it in half and use it for something else. Okay, we're now going to cut the opening for the window in the side panel. So turn the piece upwards like that, and we're going to make a pencil mark 88mm or 3.5 inches from what will become this bottom edge. So do a line at each end of the wood, 88mm, and this is the height of our window, 3.5 inches, and join that line up like that, and then we need to do a pencil line down the centre. Make a little pencil mark at the top there, and then at the bottom. And again, join those up. And then we want to make a pencil line from this line we've just drawn, 40mm from that line up to the top of the panel. So up to there, and that's the height of our window. So do the pencil line there, 40mm or 1 5/8 of an inch, and then sort of do it towards the end of that line as well. The window obviously isn't going to be as long as the side. So another line there. So we've gone across the centre, 88mm or 3.5 inches from the bottom, and then we've done a line down the centre of the piece, and now we're doing a line 40mm up from this long line here, and make the pencil mark at either end there as well, and then join that up as well. Okay, so the width of the window is going to be 137mm or 5 3/8 of an inch. So place the ruler so that half of that measurement is down this line here. Make a little mark at each end, 137mm or 5 3/8 of an inch, and do that at the top as well. And then again turn and join those up. So this section is then our window, which we'll be removing. And we're going to do the same thing as we did for the door, and we're going to make that little nick in the corner. Do it in each corner. Oops, and then in the other direction. Okay, and we can start cutting that out, and again, always against the grain for the first cut. A light cut to start. Seems a lot easier this time. I think this wood actually feels, although it's the same wood, 1.5mm Obeche, it actually feels a bit softer than the piece I used for the front and back panels, and you'll find that sometimes because, like I said before, wood is natural. It is going to, you know, be different occasionally. Slightly different tree, maybe an older tree or a younger tree. You can see the grain more clearly in this piece as well. For this project, for this shed, it doesn't matter at all. But if I was making a piece of furniture, I probably wouldn't mix the woods. Like I say, for this project, it really doesn't matter. And especially not for these walls, because we're going to be covering them with shiplap. Oops, just slipped a little bit there. There. And again, I'll save that piece for another project. And there's our window cut out. Okay, we're now going to apply the shiplap to the back panel of the shed. So each of the strips I've beveled one long edge, and to do that I just held it against the sandpaper at a 45-degree angle and just swept it across the paper like that until that beveled off. And normally I would tidy that up with a piece of fine grade sandpaper, but for this project I'm not going to. I just want everything to be quite sort of rough and ready. So apply glue straight to your panel, and just sort of maybe an inch or two up, otherwise it will dry before you get to it, and spread that out. To ensure you get right to the edges. Like that. And then just take your first strip and apply it along that bottom edge. Press it down. I'm just using my fingers there to make sure that it's flush along that bottom and at the sides as well. And it's already trying to sort of curl upwards, so press and hold for a moment until the glue begins to take. We will be weighing this all down once we've finished applying the strips. That's okay. And then the next strip I just want to put a slightly away from the first. I'm not going to measure, just a sort of hair's width really above the first, so we've just got a slight gap, and that we can just see the rounded edge of that strip below it. And press that one down. And then the next one. And again, just a very slight gap. And I'm sort of trying to hold it all down with my fingers as I go. It doesn't matter if you've cut any of the strips a little bit too long and they're overhanging at the edges, because we can turn the piece over and trim all that off once the glue has completely dried. I'm going to apply a bit more glue. And then just continue attaching the strips up to the top. So as I'm getting further up, it's getting more difficult to hold the strips down with my fingers as I work. So you can actually apply some masking tape just along the edges there and press it against your worktop just to hold them down while we're working on it. I'll put some more that side as well. We will be weighing all of this down so that it goes completely flat, but just while you're working on it, and then you can continue without having to worry about holding them down. So once you reach the sort of top where the roof begins to narrow, just keep going. And I've given sizes in the cutting list for 2 smaller strips, but they're not exact, they will overhang, and then we'll turn the piece over when it's all dry and trim them to size. So you've got one more long strip that will cover the first sort of angle. And your next one, you just sit it centrally. There's plenty of room at either side. And then the smaller one, and then there's a tiny little bit left up there. So I'm just going to find a little scrap of wood out of my bits box. I'm just going to pop that up there, like that. And then if you want to use your worktop, obviously remove this and we'll flatten it somewhere else, but I'm going to call it a day now, and I'm going to leave this to dry overnight. So put a bit of kitchen towel over your work, just so that, because I'm going to weigh it down with books. I don't want you to be getting glue on all of your best books. And I'm going to find my heaviest books, a real mixture here, nice big heavy books, to weigh that all down. And I'm going to leave that overnight, although you don't have to leave it that long, just long enough for your glue to dry off. And then we'll come back and we can trim off the excess strip. Okay, so I left that to dry overnight, and that's now a nice solid piece. And we're now going to trim away the excess wood from at the top here. So you'll need a nice sharp blade for this, so change, put a new knife blade in, which I've just done here, and we're just going to use the line of the roof there as our guide, and we just want to trim all the way down that line. So start off as you would cutting any piece of wood, just by doing a lighter score, and you might have some sort of glue that's splurged over, so just cut through that as well. Once again, always beware of where your fingers are in relation to the blade, and then just keep going until you've cut those pieces away. And again, don't be tempted to pull them away, otherwise you may sort of split the wood at the front of the shed. So just keep going and eventually that will all come away. It's quite tough because, like I said before, we're cutting at an angle across the grain, so it makes it more difficult. I'm applying a little bit more pressure now. I'm beginning to cut through. Okay, so that's the first side removed. There's a little bit of crack in there in the wood, but that's okay because we're going to sand this whole front area. So then you can turn the piece over and do the same on the other side of the roof apex. That's that side done as well. And then the other thing you can do is just come down these sides. If any of the shiplap is overlapping, you can trim that away as well. I think that side's okay, but that side I've got a little bit of overlapping. I'll just trim down there. Same thing again, just going along that line of the shed with the edge of the knife blade. We'll be gluing our support strips down here, so it needs to be completely flat. So I've got a nice straight edge. Like that, so I've just trimmed away those edges there. And then just along those sides as well, you can sand, so put the sandpaper on your worktop and just sweep the side piece along in one direction. And that will just give us a completely flush, smooth edge to attach our strip to. Do that on both sides. And then take a piece of your medium grade sandpaper, this is a 120, and just sand across the whole surface, just in small circular motions. And that will just smooth the surface, get rid of any sort of shiplap that's overhanging too much, but it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of overhang, and give us a nice base for our paint or varnish. And then when you've been over the whole surface, use a soft brush just to remove all of the sanding dust from between the grooves. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's quite a lot of clouds of dust coming off of there. Always wear a sanding mask when you're doing things like this so you don't breathe it in, or go outside and do it. There. So that piece can now be put to one side, and we'll start on the front section. Okay, so we're going to use the same technique to apply the shiplap to the front panel as we did for the back panel. So apply glue a little way up along each sort of side. And then spread that out. And there's a reason why I'm doing sort of both sides at the same time rather than working my way up there and then up there, and I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, pop that there, and then just begin by applying them, the first one obviously so it's nice and flush along that bottom edge. Again, I'm just leaving a tiny little gap between each, just a hair's width gap there. So once you've applied a few pieces, just line up the front panel with the lines on your cutting mat so that this edge here is straight with a vertical line, and so that the top of this piece here is level with one of the horizontal lines, and then this piece over here should also be level with that same line. And that's just so when we get to the top here and we're going to be applying our longer strip, that both sides are straight, otherwise we'll have an angle up there. Now if you haven't got lines on your cutting mat or you can't see them anymore, then just use your ruler and just measure to make sure that the height on both sides is the same. And if it's out and they're already drying, it doesn't matter, just adjust the gap between your next piece, just leave a slightly larger gap on one side so that they straighten up along the top. Okay, so just checking that second lot of shiplaps I've just put on. This side is just very slightly lower. Now because the glue is still quite wet, I can just very slightly move them all up a little bit. and now I've got a nice straight line along there, so I can continue. Now last time when we had the long strips we used the masking tape to secure it as we went along. Because these are shorter, they're sort of laying a little bit flatter, although we will use the masking tape once we've applied them all to the surface, and again we'll be weighing it down. I'll just continue with these shorter slats. Okay, so I've now reached the slope of the roof, so apply glue to the rest of the front piece and spread that out like that, and then you can apply these last two shorter pieces so that the inside edge is flush, so the edge on the side of the door, and that one as well. I'm just going to check once more that everything's lining up. Just go up on that side a little tiny bit, and then you can apply your longer strip just so it sits centrally. There's plenty of room at either side for the overlap, so press that down. And don't worry if it's overlapping the door entrance, because we'll be turning it over and doing the same thing again where we trim all the excess away. And I keep moving these smaller pieces with my fingers, but I'll straighten those up before I weigh it down. Next one as well, just stick it in the centre there, and then you'll just need a tiny little scrap again out of your bits box to go up there. And press that all down. Now where I've sort of been knocking these and moving them slightly out, the glue is still tacky, so I've just got time to straighten them all up, and it's trying to curl upwards as well, but that's okay because we'll be weighing it down and that will flatten it all out. Now because it's still early in the day and I want to use my desk, I'm going to secure this to a tray and then weigh it down, so just so I can move it out of my way. That, and again just cover it over with some kitchen towel so I don't ruin my books. Put that on there, and I'm going to pop those books on top. They're very heavy, so that'll weigh it all down nicely, and then I can move this whole thing out of my way and carry on with the side panel. Okay, now it's time to do the window side panel, and again exactly the same way. I've beveled one edge of each of the shiplap pieces, and I'm going to stick them on in exactly the same way. I've used some tape there just to hold these longer strips down, which are trying to curl away from the wood as the glue begins to dry. So those 6 strips there should take you up to the sort of window opening, and then you can apply the smaller strips across there. So put those into place at either side. And then just stick your next long strip straight across the top of them and overlapping that window opening. And I've got a bit of a shorter gap on this side. So I'm just going to bring these up a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it up here because the overlap of the roof will actually cover that. So stick those down and then put that final one, which is a lot wider than it needs to be, just across that top bit. Like that. Now I'm going to transfer this onto my tray and weigh it all down again. Okay, that piece is now nice and dry, so once again I'm going to turn that over and trim away all of the excess. I'm going to start along the point of the roof here. The other side. And then on this piece you'll have a little bit of an overlap at the top of the door there. So begin just by cutting a little slit at each side. This is cutting against the grain first, which is the general rule. That side as well. And then go along the straight edge with the edge of your knife blade. Just a light score to start. And then you can cut through. Oops. Like that. Straighten that off. And then, same as before, do down the sides, and this time down the inside of the door frame as well. And then once you've cut away all the overhanging pieces, once again sand along your edges, just in the one direction. I've actually already done the sides. And then to get into the doorway there, get a spare piece of wood, just a small scrap piece of wood, wrap a little piece of sandpaper around it to use as a sort of sanding block, and then you can just sand along the opening like that. Just means by making this small sanding block you're just getting a straighter edge rather than just going in there by hand. So do that along both edges. And then you can also go along that top edge. And then, as before, just finish off with a complete sand over the whole piece. Okay, so once the side piece is dried, turn that over and you can begin by removing that sort of large strip across the top there. Just doing a light score to start. Keep that piece, and then you can go inside the window and again cut against the grain first. Slits down each of those sides. And you can turn and cut away lengthwise. Remove that piece, and then do the same along that bottom where you've got a narrower piece. And then do along the sides of those windows as well. Might not be any overlapping, but just go along the edge of the blade just to make sure. There's a little bit on this side. Like that. And then again go down your outside edges. And then you can sand along your outside edges and make your little sanding block there to go along the inside edges of the window. And again you can then sand over the whole surface. Okay, so that's our three sort of main pieces completed, but before we add the mouldings, just go over with sandpaper on the other side as well, which will become the inside of the shed. Use smaller pieces to concentrate on any glue residue, get rid of that, and then you can wrap a larger piece around a full-size sanding block just to do the rest. It's quite a large area, so that will make it easier. That concludes part 1 of this tutorial. Please join me in part 2.